Hey folks, in today's video I'm going to answer the question why I don't winterize my RV, but more importantly, how I accomplish that. Now this is actually the fourth video I've done on this particular topic over the last few years. It all started about 3 years ago when I published a video discussing sealing the underbelly of my RV. And at the time I had a Jayco Pinnacle fifth wheel. And basically I was taking something that I learned when I built the barn behind me in terms of air sealing and applying it essentially to an RV. And so that was the first video that started all this. And then about a year after that, I published a follow-up because I did have some objections to sealing up the underbelly. And so I discussed, some of those objections and published that video about a year later. And then shortly after, I did a third video adding in an electric heater in the underbelly of that fifth wheel. So this is really the fourth video on this topic, and you'll see that now I have a travel trailer, so it's a little bit different. But basically this video is going to be the culmination of really everything I've learned over the last 3 years in terms of sealing up your RV to keep that heat in there, that conditioned air, but also some of the things that I've learned and as I've refined things and tweaked things over the years. And so I really want to put this video out in hopes that it will help the RV community. And by the way, folks, if you didn't catch those previous 3 videos, I will include links below, but I am going to be summarizing really the same content in those previous 3 videos in today's video just for the sake of time. And so with that, let me talk about the first question very briefly, and that is, why don't I winterize my RV? And really the answer is, in short, we still go camping in the off season, November, December, January, February, and so forth. And so to have to, winterize the RV and then unwinterize it repeatedly, it's just a lot of extra, work and hassle. So that's the main reason. And then also where I live here in Georgia, it definitely gets into the freezing temperatures here and there, but typically we're not, under 30 for weeks and weeks at a time. And so typically we'll have some nights here and there that dipping down to the 20s, and then maybe once in a while a week or two where it's in the 20s and almost in the 30s during the daytime, but very rarely is it just outright in the teens, day after day after day. And so I'm able to get away with not winterizing it by doing some of these simple techniques that I'm going to go through in today's video. And it just makes it a lot easier than to use the RV throughout the season, even in the winter months. And so with that, in the remainder of the video, I'm going to be discussing how do I accomplish that? How do I get away with not winterizing my RV? What are the tools and techniques that I use in order to accomplish that? And the first one is really simple. It all goes back to that first video that started all of this, and that is sealing up your underbelly. Most RVs, just about all of them on the market, even entry-level travel trailers, are advertised as having a heated and enclosed underbelly, right? And so enclosed is used kind of loosely because, yeah, it is enclosed. Typically there's some kind of substrate, some kind of material on the bottom of the RV that encloses all the pipes, the water pipes and the sewer pipes and so forth. But there's a lot of gaps and cracks where not only the heat can escape and get out, but also rodents and bugs can get in. And so really everything starts with sealing the underbelly because it's a step that a lot of manufacturers don't take all the way. And guys, it's not just certain brands. I would say the majority of RVs out there have room to improve when it comes to sealing up that underbelly. Now, the original video that I published on sealing up the underbelly basically revolved around this product right here. This is zip flashing tape. And like I said, I learned about this when I was building my barn. This is actually used to seal up the sheathing panels in lieu of using house wrap. And it does an excellent job of doing that. And so I tried it on my RV and found that it worked really well, sticking to the underbelly material and sealing up the underbelly to the I-beam there. And so every RV is going to be built a little bit differently, but most are going to have a very similar underbelly material that's some kind of corrugated plastic. Sometimes it's horizontal lines running along the material, or sometimes you can see here I've got almost like little bubbles essentially for insulation. On the other side of this is some foil essentially that's laminated together to try to encapsulate and trap more heat. But most RVs are going to have some kind of similar material like this, and really the joint that we want to pay attention to is how that material gets attached to the outside of the RV, typically at an I-beam. I mean, here's a much smaller I-beam right here compared to what was on my Pinnacle, but different brands do it different ways. And you can see here on my Grand Design, they take the material and run it all the way to the outside of the I-beam, and then they attach it with screws and washers all the way down the side there. Some RVs actually put the material and let it rest on the inside of the I-beam, and it might look a little bit neater because then you see the I-beam actually, you know, it's hidden basically under this material. But every brand does it a little bit differently. And like I said, some brands do a better job of sealing up this connection than others. If you've got one like mine where it's on the outside of your I-beam, of your frame, you know, you want to make sure that the manufacturer has plenty of fasteners all the way down so that you don't have gaps where you could pull the material down and, you know, slide a hand into, because that means heat is going to escape and of course rodents can get in. So that is the first thing really, is to seal that up. Now you'll notice that I don't have zip tape like I've preached about in previous videos here on this RV, and that is because this connection is different here compared to my Jayco Pinnacle. And so if I get real close, you can see that actually Grand Design did a really good job of putting fasteners throughout so that this material stays nice and tight. So instead of using the zip tape, which I could have done, I could have wrapped the tape kind of around this and went the full length around the frame. But what I did instead, because it was already pretty tight and pretty consistent throughout, I instead used a liquid sealant and basically flashed with liquid all the way around this joint between the I-beam and the corrugated underbelly material. And that really worked out better for me because this is such a tight joint already, and so I just needed just a little bit to seal that up all the way along the perimeter of the underbelly material. And by the way, folks, I will include links down in the description below to all the different products that I've used, but I just wanted to emphasize that the first step is to seal up the underbelly. And what you're looking at here is the front of my RV actually underneath. I wanted to show you that here I actually did use that zip tape right there to seal up the underbelly to the front frame. That really was a better choice compared to trying to use that liquid flashing. So it really just depends on how your RV is put together. In my case, like I said, I was able to use liquid flashing along the perimeter, along the sides and the back of the RV. And then sometimes you get to spots like right here where there is a little bit of a larger gap. And so that's where the expanding foam that I've talked about in previous videos comes in handy to make sure that's all sealed up, because you don't want any of the heat that's generated in your RV, or cooling for that matter in the summertime, to be leaking out of the underbelly. I mean, basically think about your RV as one giant envelope all the way around from the top to the bottom, to the sides, to the front, and so forth. And so if your underbelly is exposed and leaking to the outside, remember that underbelly is connected to your living space. Ultimately, where pipes penetrate and fifth wheels, it's even more open. And so when you're conditioning your RV, whether it's in the summer with cool air or more importantly in the wintertime with hot air, you don't want that air to be leaking out of the bottom of your RV. Then it's almost like you're heating the entire world with your RV, or your entire campsite at least. And same thing in the summer months. You don't want that cool conditioned air to be leaking out, or humidity for that matter to be creeping in through the underbelly into your living space. And so that's really what I've talked about in more detail in some of the previous videos I've done on this subject matter. Again, guys, I'll put the links down below. But let me just address a couple quick things on that subject matter and kind of reemphasize. Number one, when you seal up that underbelly, you don't want to be sealing up connections between your living space and that underbelly that aren't already sealed, because you don't want to create a separate envelope that's just your underbelly all by itself isolated. That would be bad, because then you could collect, moisture and other undesirable things in that underbelly space. You still want there to be airflow. In most RVs, there already is airflow between the underbelly and the living space, so you don't want to destroy that. Second would be, people say, well, what about if you have a leak in your underbelly with a pipe? Because there's tons of pipes and water connections down there. And so what if you have a leak? If everything's sealed, it's just going to become a pool essentially down there, right? And so I don't think it's a bad idea actually to have some very small holes up in your underbelly, along the center where it's going to belly down and kind of bulge anyway. And so maybe just some really
small holes right there.
Just something that's small enough that if any water did accumulate, it would have a way to drain out. So I mean, we're talking about taking a small nail or screw and just punching a couple holes along the center, the middle of your underbelly, and basically we're controlling where it's leaky essentially. Instead of having it leaky all the way around the perimeter of the underbelly, we're controlling it and putting some small holes up in the middle. And that way, if any moisture or water is in there, it can, drain out. And so really that's the first step when it comes to answering the question of how do I not winterize my RV? How do I get away with that? But not only that, sealing up the underbelly is also going to make your RV just more comfortable year round, right? Because in the summer months, you don't have to worry about humidity, coming in from the underbelly, especially if you've got an exhaust fan in and bringing up all that air from the outside. But then also in the winter months, if you're using your furnace, more of that hot air is going to stay within your RV because it's not just leaking out of the underbelly. So really that's the first step. The second step, and this one might be geeking out a little bit, but I think it's helpful once you get everything sealed up to place some temperature sensors throughout your RV so that you can track and know what is the temperature in certain parts that maybe you're not getting access to on a regular basis, such as your underbelly. And so what I mean by that is you want to look for vulnerable points of your RV. So in my RV, almost all the plumbing runs along this driver's side of the RV, pretty much along this bottom section right here, because I've got my kitchen on the other side of this wall and my bathroom here in the rear. So it's really simple on this one. Yours might be a little bit more complex, but all my plumbing is along here, and that's really what's vulnerable. And so I've got a temperature sensor in the rear, right back here, where probably 80% of the plumbing is with the shower, the toilet, the bathroom, and everything. And then I've got another temperature sensor right about here, which is just below the kitchen area. And then the water, of course, connects here in the front compartment. So I've got another temperature sensor in the front storage compartment. And then, of course, you can put a temperature sensor in the actual living space of your RV so that you know. And that way, if your RV is put away in storage, you can track the temperature and see, how well is it, staying heated in the most vulnerable spots of the RV. Okay, last, let's talk about the third and final step, and that is heat. I alluded to this in the first and second step, whether it's trapping heat in your underbelly by sealing the underbelly, or in the second step with the temperature sensors, knowing how well that heat is staying in the most vulnerable zones of your RV. So how are we going to create and produce that heat, right? Well, if you're out camping, it's no problem because typically you're going to be using the built-in propane furnace. Mine's got one on it, just like most RVs, you can see there. And they do a pretty good job of heating the RV, putting out just a really high amount of BTUs when you're out camping. But if your RV's in storage, it's not really practical to be, running your furnace all the time. You could do that, but it's gonna consume a lot of propane, and then you're kind of needlessly heating up the inside of your RV, probably more than you really need to. But like I stated in the intro of the video, this is really the culmination of what I've learned over the last 3 years on this subject matter. And I've always been looking for a better source to heat the RV compared to the propane furnace, because it's just really overkill, a lot of energy and fuel wasted there, propane fuel. And so I stumbled upon, about 2 years ago, an electric heater that's really more popular in the marine industry. It's considered more of a bilge heater, but it's an all-electric heater made by Xtreme Heaters. They've got different models, different power ratings on them, but the one that I've been using is their highest power unit that's 800 watts. And basically it's an electric heater that I've got mounted in my underbelly, in my case on the rear, and I'll talk more about that here in just a minute. But it's basically an electric heater that has one job and one job only, and that is to turn on when the temperature gets below a certain threshold that they preset, and then it turns off when it gets above a certain threshold. It's got no buttons, no settings, nothing. You plug it in and it's gonna be working all of the time and monitoring the temperature. And so I really like it a lot because it exactly fits the mission of what I was trying to accomplish, and that is keep the vulnerable sections of my underbelly above freezing so that I don't have to worry about winterizing, all those water pipes. Now, previously I published a far more detailed review and demonstration on that Xtreme electric heater. That was actually on my Jayco Pinnacle fifth wheel. And so if you didn't catch that video, I'll put a card up above and a link in the description below. It's far more detailed and goes through all the different questions you might have on it. But after using that Xtreme heater in my fifth wheel for over a year, even after I sold it, I decided to buy a second Xtreme heater and put it on my travel trailer here. And so I want to talk briefly about how that Xtreme heater has worked, because the travel trailer and the way it's designed with the frame is quite a bit different than a fifth wheel. And so I want to touch on that briefly. In my previous fifth wheel, it was a drop frame fifth wheel, and it had a much larger I-beam, so much taller underbelly essentially. And typically the way fifth wheels are made, when they have that I-beam running along the full length of the RV, what runs between and connects the two I-beams is what I would consider an open web truss system, very similar to what you might find in a house that has an open web truss system. And basically it means instead of having a solid sheet of metal between the two I-beams, there's kind of this open web truss that's got, you've probably seen it before, zigzags in different directions, basically engineered to provide the strength of a solid piece of metal, but it's engineered to be lighter. And so the advantage of that in a fifth wheel is that you have a lot more airflow in your underbelly, because all those supports, those cross members that are connecting the two I-beams, they're mostly open. And so it allows for lots of airflow from front to back. And so the Xtreme heater, really, its forte is moving air. It has a very high CFM. And so it's constantly forcing and pushing that air throughout the underbelly and circulating it. So it works a lot better, in my opinion, in a fifth wheel or an RV that has a more open underbelly and doesn't have lots of interruptions, blocking airflow. In my travel trailer here, it has a much shorter I-beam essentially, and in some sections more of like a C-channel type frame, but the cross members going between the two sides, the outer, are more solid, and they have a few holes here and there for things like ducts and pipes to pass through, but it's mostly solid, and that has to do with the height of the frame, because it's a lot shorter here given the size of the travel trailer. So the challenge then becomes getting airflow from front to back, because it's more closed up between the different sections where the supports are. And so the reason that I put the Xtreme heater back here on the rear corner of the RV, it's just inside the rear here, is that this is probably where about, roughly 80% of the plumbing is. I've got a shower, a toilet, a sink right here, and then the water heater's on the other side. So everything's kind of flowing along here and then going there. And so I figured, put the heater right where the bulk of the plumbing is, the vulnerable sections. But then I've got some water lines running along the side here to the front where the water connection actually is here. And so I positioned it where there are some holes, some pass-throughs for ducts and such that run along the side here in the pipes, hoping that some of that air would be forced and pushed toward the front of the RV, because there are at least 2 water pipes running there. And so what I found is, again, putting a temperature sensor up here in the front where some vulnerable water lines are, that yes, it stays nice and warm in the back, in the rear where the actual heater is, but some of that heat makes it to the front, but not all of it, unfortunately. And it's just because it's more closed up here in a travel trailer. Now, in my previous RV where I first tested the Xtreme heater, it was a lot longer, 42 feet to be exact. This is only about 21 feet here. And I was able to get away with just one Xtreme heater. I positioned it kind of in the front third of the fifth wheel facing back, and it was able to force air all the way pretty much to the back of the RV, believe it or not. And that was because, again, the fifth wheel had a taller I-beam and it had open web trusses, cross members running between them, which allowed for greater airflow. And so with the travel trailer, obviously you could get 2 of the Xtreme heaters because it's more closed off. You could put one in the rear and one in the front perhaps, but they are kind of expensive. And so that left me searching for a solution that would kind of bridge the gap, so to speak, and add some auxiliary heat in addition to the Xtreme heater that would help with the front section of my RV, something that would be cost effective. And it kind of surprised me what solution that I landed with. You're looking at it right here. This is, of course, a Dyson heater right here. It's kind of one of those hot and cool fans that they make. And the reason I bought this was actually not to solve the problem of, not winterizing the RV and keeping it warm when it gets below freezing. I bought this actually to use while we're camping to heat my RV, because the built-in furnace, although it's very nice, it's very powerful. And when it comes on, it basically just gets things too hot too quickly. And so it would be, turning on and then turning off, and the temperature would be up and down, up and down, up and down, and just really too hot. And I just wanted something that was a much slower, consistent, even heat. And believe it or not, this guy right here keeps a smaller RV like mine here at a very comfortable temperature. And what makes this different than most space heaters is that it is thermostatically controlled. And so instead of having, a low, medium, and high, or something like that, where you're just not sure what temperature you're setting it to, you actually set this to a specific temperature. And so having this inside the living space of my RV, I set it to typically, 55 to 57 degrees, depending on how cool it's going to be outside. And that will, just having this ambient source of heat inside the living space, that kind of bleeds down below to the underbelly. And that solves the problem of keeping those water lines, which are basically running under the floor right below here, keeping those water lines above freezing in the underbelly. And again, the key is having that underbelly sealed. If it wasn't sealed, then all this hot air that's being generated and going into the underbelly, it would just leak outside, and it wouldn't be able to overcome the cool air that's outside. But having it sealed up, even though it's just a very thin layer of corrugated, plastic essentially with some foil on the opposite side, this generates enough auxiliary heat, even at 55 degrees, combined with the Xtreme heater, which is all the way in the underbelly back behind the toilet and the shower back there, that combined, they generate enough heat to keep everything in the underbelly, all the vulnerable water lines, above freezing. And as an added bonus, and really I think this is the primary reason of why you would buy one of these in the first place, and that is that you can use it to heat your RV when you're actually using it. It's thermostatically controlled. They give you this little remote right here, and you can real easily see what you've set it to, and then it's going to quietly cycle on and off, just like your HVAC system at home with the furnace. And let me just say, I've had some of the most comfortable nights here in the RV since I upgraded to this in lieu of using the propane furnace. So I mention all that as, even if you're not interested in an auxiliary source of heat, if you plan on not winterizing your RV like I've done here, this is by far my favorite space heater yet that I've tested in an RV. I think it's well worth the price, and it just makes it very comfortable. And the fact that you can control it thermostatically, I really like that a lot. But let me close out the video by answering the question that I think everyone wants to know at this point, and that is, what are the end results? I mean, after doing those 3 steps, sealing up the underbelly first, then second, adding some temperature sensors, and then third, generating auxiliary heat, whether it's with the Xtreme heater that I've got down there, plus the Dyson Hot Cool heater that's on the inside living space. What does all that actually do for you, and how does this perform in a real world situation, right? And so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to overlay on the video basically some data that I collected over a temperature drop, where the temperatures dropped overnight to about 23 degrees or so. 23 was the low, I think, and they were mostly hovering around 23, 24, 25 overnight. And really, what does the temperature look like inside the RV, inside the underbelly, at the different vulnerable points? And so I'm just going to play across the video there, different zones where I've got the temperature sensors, and then you'll see the outside temperature along with the different temperature sensors in the underbelly. And that way you can see what does it actually look like there. And I'll just keep replaying it. But basically you can see in the rear of the RV where the Xtreme heater is, that temperature sensor that I've got there basically is just confirming that the Xtreme heater is working properly. That's one of the things I love about it, is it's designed with a specific mission, and that is to turn on at a certain temperature and then turn off at a certain temperature, and it works just flawlessly. And so you're going to notice that it's a very consistent temperature there in the rear of the underbelly, where really the majority of the vulnerable plumbing is located. But then if you move to the front, further away from the Xtreme heater, I've got another temperature sensor right about there where some more water lines are located. And so you'll notice there that even though it's further away from that Xtreme heater, because I've got some auxiliary heat inside the RV that's bleeding down to the underbelly, you'll see there that even at the coldest point, it was 33 degrees, I think was the coldest point right there. And so when it's, 23 outside, to have a 10-degree differential, and, we're talking about a very thin sheet of corrugated plastic separating the outside from the inside. I think that's pretty impressive to have a 10-degree difference, 23 degrees outside, 33 degrees inside. And granted, that is pretty close to freezing, but if I were to bump up the inside temperature with the Dyson Hot Cool heater, then that certainly would change that dynamic there. And plus, like I said, we don't get into the 20s frequently. So, I mean, this solution, you can clearly see, is going to have different results depending on, where you live and how cold things get. But notice how I've got another temperature sensor in the front here, the front storage compartment where the water connections are. And that one, the lowest temperature it recorded was 36 degrees right there. And so I think that gives you an idea of when you go to all these links, sealing up the underbelly, adding the temperature sensors, then adding the heat sources, this is what, a real world scenario looks like. And you can see when it gets down to 23 degrees, what all the other temperatures are looking like in the RV. And I just want to remind you that all that data I just showed you, those results, all of that was accomplished by using zero propane, no propane whatsoever. And for those curious, well, how much are you spending on electricity? I figure over the typical night, the way I'm using it, I probably spend about $1, maybe $2 at the most. Compare that to if I was using the propane furnace, I might be spending $5 or more per night. So it's very inexpensive, which, speaking of electricity, you don't necessarily need 30 or 50 amp power like I have here. I actually have the Xtreme heater running off of this extension cord right here. It's just a little short 6-footer, and check this out. I added a plug up here. This one's from Noco, and it basically accepts the female end of an extension cord, and then the Xtreme heater is plugged in on the opposite side here up in the underbelly, of course on the opposite side right there. And so this allows me to, even if I'm out at a campsite where it's going to get really cold, I can plug in that Xtreme heater using this port right here to the pedestal, to the 15 or 20 amp connection, and I still have then my 30 amp for the RV itself. Okay, so that is a summary of how I accomplished my goal of not winterizing my RV, really just a culmination of what I've learned over the last 3 years on this subject matter. And I'm really happy with the results that I'm getting. I'm really pleased with just the efficiency and ease of how everything's set up and works together. Now, I realize I didn't include all the details for everything in this video. I didn't want to make it too long, especially since I've got 3 previous videos that are more detailed on each one of these different facets. And so again, I'll put links to all those videos down below. Definitely check those out if you want all the details. But if you have any questions, definitely drop me a comment below. I'd be glad to answer them. Again, I'll put links to all the different products featured in this video down below. I appreciate you using those to help support the channel. As always, thanks for watching.